Today we are going to make a Tuscan inspired soup. What we will be focusing on is the mirepoix, sweating, wilting, and some very basic prep cuts. We will use a soup to look at how texture and flavors differ by how much we cook it and how big the item is. We're going to be doing the exact opposite of what we would be doing in a restaurant and what the last couple of videos told you to do. Today we will be cutting all of our vegetables to rough. And you would normally hear people saying that like a rough chop or a rough dice and so on, and the rough part just means we're not going to be worried about making all the pieces the same size. They can be drastically different. Your smallest might be half the size of your biggest. And that way you get to taste different textures, not taste, but you get different textures in different doneness in each piece, so you can see how that works. So, with that, let's make soup. Starting with the onion, we will top and tail it. This just means that we are removing the two ends of whatever it is we happen to be prepping. Then we will cut it in half and remove the paper and the outer layer of the onion. These two parts generally have a bitter flavor to them. On the outer layer, if there's any green on it, it will usually be bitter. The paper is always quite bitter, and while I would save the onion layer to make stock, I would not keep the paper because while you can use it for color, it will also add bitterness that may be unwelcome in the dish you use your stock in. Now, we will look at two ways to cut the onions. For the first half, we will look at my preferred method for when I'm cooking at home. While it is a bit slower than the second, it's also a fair bit safer. For this, all we need to do is cut along the radius of the onion half, and to do that, we just want to keep our knife at a 90-degree angle to the onion, following it along the curve. The amount of space that you put between each cut lets you decide the sizes of your pieces. With just a bit of practice, you can easily make your pieces any size that you want, from rough chops to fine dice. Once you are finished with all the cuts, just make our final slices as thick or as thin as you would like them. This method gives you a lot of control over the size of the pieces and how consistently they will cook. This does give you some slices that are smaller, and while that's fine for the home cook, it will not work in a professional kitchen. Finally, for the end pieces, we just want to slice it into strips and cut them to match the size of the rest of our onions. And for the second version, we will want to make our cuts vertically this time. Again, we use the distance between the cuts to determine the size of our pieces. Once you have all of the vertical slices cut, we will put one or two horizontal slices almost all the way through the onion. Once this is done, we just slice it to our desired thickness and do the same thing with the end pieces as we did in the first half of the onion. We will begin breaking down our celery by slicing the tops and the white area on the bottom of our celery sticks off. The top tends to be a bit woody in texture, and that can be a bit tough to bite through. The white area is bitter to some people like myself. Next, we're just going to slice the celery into pieces across the width of the stalks. Again, this is a great dish to practice getting all of your cuts the same size, since we only need to do some quick and simple slices. But the first time you make this, I would suggest not worrying about consistent slices and instead go wild as you see me doing here. Instead, making them all uneven slices. By doing this, you can see how the thinner ones get softer than the larger pieces, and you can actually use this to determine how you like them in your soup. Doing things like this allows you to start making a recipe your own instead of that original recipe you read. Or, as one of my instructors used to say, make it their way twice and then make it yours forever. Now I will show you how to prep your carrots for square or rectangular shapes such as cubes or sticks or batons. First we will top and tail the carrot just as we did with the onion, followed by cutting it in half. Then we will start by squaring off the larger piece. For this, we can just cut along the outer edges, trying to take the least material off while making it into a more uniform shape. You will tend to have some rounded corners on a few of the end pieces, but that's going to be perfectly fine, since other than their appearance, they will still end up cooking in about the same amount of time. Once this is done, we will begin making a series of vertical cuts to the thickness we would like our final pieces to be. By cutting the carrot into progressively smaller pieces like this, we are making it easier to both control the food and also get the size we want our pieces to be at. The reason that this is important is that it's inherently more dangerous and harder to manually cut into large objects with any accuracy. For professional kitchens, this is also about finding the most consistent method that uses the smallest number of cuts and takes the least amount of time. After we get our slices done, we can just stack them on top of each other again and make another series of vertical cuts to get the carrot planks into batons or sticks. As for the pieces that we trimmed off, we will just cut them up to be a bit smaller. Like the onion's outer layers, these can also be saved for making stocks if you'd like, but for today, I'm just putting them in the soup. Once our carrots are broken into sticks or batons, we can just cut them into rough cubes. While doing this, make sure you are not trying to do too many at once, as that can cause you to slip while cutting, and that is something we would certainly not want to happen. I usually find about 3 to 4 sticks to be a comfortable number to be cutting at once. I do have small hands. And remember, unless you're in a professional kitchen, there is no need to rush anything. Take your time, and you will be much better off, since you will have to fix fewer mistakes and you will avoid more kitchen accidents. And finally, for the smaller ends of the carrots, I'm just going to cut them in half and make half moons out of them. I'll try to make these slices roughly the same thickness as the other pieces, or you could break it down just as we did the first piece, squaring it off and making planks or batons using a paring knife. But for today, I'm just going to use them to add a small variety to the texture by making them slightly larger than the rest of the pieces. Next up are zucchini. First we will top and tail the zucchini just like we did with the last couple of vegetables. Once we are done with that, we are going to peel our zucchini. This is optional though, since zucchini peel actually has a pleasant flavor. So why do we peel it if the zucchini peel has a pleasant flavor? The reason is certain vegetables and fruits can be waxed for shine and moisture retention. This makes them more likely to sell and dramatically extends the shelf life. This wax can be removed with a vegetable brush or a mixture of any acid and baking soda. For the acid, I've primarily seen people using vinegar and lemon juice, but for this, I think any acidic solution would work. Sadly, these vegetables had some very stubborn wax, so I'm peeling them today to avoid any of it being in the soup. We will take our newly peeled zucchini and cut it in half lengthwise, followed by cutting those pieces lengthwise again to quarter it. This is going to give us a very nice triangular shaped pieces that will once again add to our variety in textures as well as looking nice in our soup. Also, if you happen to leave your peel on, it will add a nice contrasting color to the orange in the carrots and the white in the onions. And finally, we will just do a rough slice on our zucchini to make the pieces. The reason we are doing most everything today as a rough chop or slice is because this is also a great opportunity to find out how you like your ingredients cooked. Do you like your zucchini super soft? Or maybe you want a bit of crunch left in it? The only way you will find out is experimenting with your ingredients. Soups like this are a great place to experiment with different levels of cooking, since you can decide not only how big or small the pieces will be, but also when you add them to the pot. Also, since I forgot to explain earlier how I can tell if a fruit or vegetable has wax on it, the way I can usually tell is that wax produce feels like a slick, flat surface, where the natural wax or unwaxed type feels like a slick, slightly bumpy surface. That's not the only way you can tell. You can also kind of scratch it a little bit with your fingernail, although I wouldn't recommend doing that in a store. There are a lot of fruits and vegetables that can be waxed though. Pretty much all the citrus fruits, avocados, most gourds, and pretty much any thin-skinned fruit or vegetable from apples to tomatoes to plums. The wax itself is edible and harmless, but sometimes it seems like the waxing machine just gets a little overeager and you get zucchini like this one where the excess wax may actually affect the flavor of the dish. And now we will bring everything together. First, we're going to start by adding 2 tablespoons of oil to our preheated pan on medium heat. Then we're going to add our mirepoix and salt and pepper. The mirepoix is the onions, celery, and carrots that we cut earlier. The mirepoix is what we call a flavor base. This means that it is a set of flavors or ingredients that is used in a great deal of dishes for a particular region or a region within a country. Basically, an area, they like this thing. This one is from France. The mirepoix will typically follow the ratio of 2 parts onion to 1 part carrot and 1 part celery. We will look at more flavor bases as we cook with them. Now, the process you are seeing in the background is what we call sweating. You will see this in recipes such as this soup asking you to sweat down the ingredient. This time that's the mirepoix. What you're doing is causing the vegetable to begin to lose its moisture and softening up a little bit. Thus, the name sweating. You'll want to be stirring every minute or two while this is cooking, and it would benefit you to have a wider pot like the one I'm using here. This allows the mirepoix to be ready faster due to the increase of the surface area on it. So in this example, this is going to take me about 8 minutes or so to get the onions where I want them. So the two things I'm looking for is the onions being translucent and the carrots beginning to soften. Now, since we cut everything in awkward sizes, we're only going to be looking for about half the onions to be translucent and about half the carrots to be softening, or noticeably. This will let us get a small difference between the biggest and smallest pieces in our texture if you decided to experiment on eating the pieces as we did. And we'll just zip past this to the part where there's translucent, and I will show you what the onions look like, and we will start getting the next ingredient in there. And now, through the magic of editing, poof, we're already at the point I wanted our mirepoix to be at. Now, looking at the onions, you can see the top one is slightly see-through, and the bottom one is still white, and you can't see through it. The see-through one is now translucent, where we wanted our about half the onions to be, so right now it looks like there's about half the onion, so we're good. Now we're going to add our zucchini, and the rest of the spices, and the vegetable stock that I may or may not have accidentally deleted the footage on. Once we have all of that in, we can bring it to a boil for about 4 to 5 minutes. I wouldn't go much past that though, otherwise the texture differences between the bigger pieces and smaller pieces will not be quite as noticeable. Once the 4 or 5 minutes is up, we will add our spinach. All that we need to do with our spinach to prep it is rinse it under water and toss it right in. I find about 3 cups of spinach seems to be about the most you'd like want to add so it doesn't overpower any of the other flavors. I ended up using about 2 cups here. Finally, while you wait for your spinach to wilt down, you'll want to taste your soup and decide if you need any extra salt and pepper. This is the step where salt and pepper to taste. For mine, we ended up using a teaspoon extra of salt and a half a teaspoon of pepper. If you add too much pepper, don't panic, unless it was a huge amount over like 2 teaspoons. You can just let it cool overnight in the refrigerator and just have it tomorrow night. The sugar in the corn will come out and mix with the pepper, and it'll reduce the perceived amount of pepper and the perceived amount of heat. And that way you'll be able to eat it and it'll still be good. If you oversalt it, again, don't worry. Just go get another, like a cup or 2 of stock and add that, and you'll be fine. So, here is what it will look like when your spinach is fully wilted down and almost ready to eat. You'll want to let this cool for probably about 10 minutes or so. Since we used a lot of vegetables in the soup, it's going to retain a little heat a little bit longer than if we had used mostly broth. So, 5 to 10 minutes should be fine to eat it at that point. And there you have a Tuscan-inspired soup that I hope you enjoy. It's a nice light soup that you can have any time of year and is a great jumping off point for experimenting. You could and should try it a few times with changes in the amounts of spices, or maybe add something like fennel, anise, or clove, maybe smoked paprika. You could swap out the zucchini with celery or squash. You could also add beans like navies or cannellis. It would probably, with more broth, be an excellent chicken soup base. So, the next episode for this series will be a few weeks. I will have other videos coming out with recipes and things like cooking in a small amount of time and things you can just put together in everyday meals. The next 2 episodes of this series, on the other hand, I need to get a little better at animation to fully show the information I want to show. This series is also, these next 2 episodes especially, are aimed more towards people who want to do this for a living, so I need to double check all of the information that I have to make sure it's relevant to today's standards and how things are done today. So I need to double check some information, and that's why it's going to take a little bit. There will be more videos in that time span, though. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this, hit the like button, and for more, hit that subscribe button below. And as always, enjoy your meal.